The Roman polytheistic religion involved the worship of many different gods and goddesses. Diana was goddess of the moon and hunting. The Greeks called her Artemis. The Romans depicted her in statues that decorated their temples with her short hunting tunic, bow, and arrows. Apollo was the god of the sun, music, and medicine. The Romans and Greeks called him by the same name. They portrayed him as a beardless young man, often with a lyre. Just like us, the Romans enjoyed hearing stories about gods like Apollo and Diana, but did they actually believe those stories? My name is Susan Dunning, and I research Roman history and religion at Somerville College, Oxford. Today, we're going to explore whether the Romans really believed in their gods. Did they feel some kind of personal, emotional attachment to them when they worshipped them in their religious ceremonies? We're going to address these questions about Romans and their gods by taking the approach of an Oxford tutorial. We'll look at some primary sources, that is, images of Roman art and texts by Roman authors, and identify who and what we find in these sources. We'll then look at their context to see how these sources fit in with our understanding of the society in which they were created. Does the text or image give us new information about ancient Rome? What does the source not tell us? In the process, we will learn to ask good questions about what is going on in our sources. There's no such thing as a stupid question, but some questions are better than others at helping us find the information we need. Finally, we will use what we've learned to see the strengths and weaknesses in the answers others have already given, and in the questions they've asked. Let's start out with some basic information about how the Romans worshipped their gods, and apply the question I just asked. Did the Romans believe in their gods, or feel emotionally attached to them in their religious ceremonies? This monument shows a typical scene in Roman worship, a sacrifice of something precious, such as livestock, as a gift to the gods. In this scene, we see a procession of men leading a pig, a sheep, and an ox to an altar to sacrifice to Mars, the god of war and farming. The choice of these three animals indicates that this is a special kind of sacrifice, called a sua vetaurilia. The animals are all male, because Mars was a male god. Goddesses received female animals. The men wear togas, a formal kind of attire that showed they were Roman citizens. The man at the altar, an emperor, has his toga carefully drawn over his head to show that he is sacrificing in the Roman style. He will recite prayers to Mars, asking that the sacrifice will be acceptable. After this, slaves will kill the animals, and parts of them will be burned on the altar. Everything must be done carefully and correctly. If the prayers are said incorrectly, or an animal gets scared and tries to bolt, or if the slaughtered animal shows some kind of defect in its organs, the whole rite must be redone, or the god will be angry. Many scholars have concluded that because the Romans set so much store by these formal rituals, they weren't concerned with what the performers thought or felt as they were doing so, or if they actually believed the gods existed. What mattered for the Romans, they argue, was getting the details of the outward actions correct. But we can get more context for sacrifices from a different source. In 17 BCE, the first emperor, Augustus, decided to create a new festival, the Saecular Games, to celebrate the arrival of a new age, a saeculum, of peace and prosperity at Rome after civil wars. Augustus wanted to show the Romans that he enjoyed the special favor of the gods, especially his patron Apollo, and that this favor would be bestowed on the next generation of Romans. His elaborate festival included numerous sacrifices at night and during the day, as well as theatrical games and chariot races. To record the details of the Saecular Games, Augustus had this large inscription set up. At a high point in the festival, Augustus prays, "Apollo! As it is prescribed for you in those books, and for this reason may every good fortune attend the Roman people, the Quirites. Let sacrifice be made to you with 9 popana, and 9 liba, and 9 ptoes, all types of cake. I beg you and pray." To Diana in the same words. We also read that afterwards, a choir of 27 boys and 27 girls, representing the next generation, sang a hymn in front of Augustus's new temple for Apollo and Diana. How does this inscription help us answer the question about Roman belief in and personal attachment to their gods? Augustus's ritual seems a lot like the sacrifice to Mars. Augustus is very careful to recite the words of prayers recorded in books, and he's taken pains to get the sacrifice right. On this occasion, Apollo and Diana receive different kinds of honey cakes, perhaps a bit like scones or donuts. The number of cakes, 27, for each deity, matches the number of boys and girls in the choir. At first reading, this inscription seems to support the idea that the Romans weren't too concerned about whether or not people believed that the gods existed, or felt any sense of emotional support and comfort in worshipping them. What seems to matter for the Romans is that religious ceremonies go off without a hitch. This is when we should pause and think about what is being left out of the sources we have looked at. Augustus's inscription was only intended to commemorate his festival and give the bare details. It tells us nothing about what he, his heir, or other participants thought about the whole business. Augustus portrayed Apollo as his special patron and protector, who helped him defeat his opponents and become emperor. Did he feel a sense of pride and gratitude as he sacrificed in front of Apollo's image? What about the children in the choir? Did they feel nervous as they prepared to sing in front of the emperor and his officials? In their hymn, they sang about Apollo and Diana protecting them. Did they feel excited to represent Rome's future? Or comforted to enjoy such special divine protection? Let's look at another text to see if we can fill in the gaps left by our first two sources. In the later 1st century CE, a wealthy philosopher named Seneca wrote an account of how common people behaved when visiting one of the most important temples in Rome on the Capitoline Hill. This temple was dedicated to Jupiter, king of the gods, his wife, Juno, and his daughter Minerva, goddess of war and wisdom. Statues of these 3 deities were placed inside the temple. Seneca writes, "If ever you go up on the Capitoline, it will make you feel ashamed just to see the crazy performances put on for the public's benefit, all represented as duties by light-hearted lunacy. So Jupiter has a special attendant to announce callers, and another one to tell him the time, one to wash him, and another to oil him, who in fact only mimes the movement with his hands. Juno and Minerva have special women hairdressers, who operate some distance away, not just from the statue, but from the temple. They move their fingers in the style of hairdressers, while others again hold mirrors. You find some people who are praying to the gods to put up bail for them, and others again who are handing over their writs and expounding the lawsuits they are involved in. There used to be an old, decrepit, but very experienced pantomime artist who put on his act every day on the Capitol, as if the gods were enjoying the show, now that they had been abandoned by human beings." Soon afterwards, Seneca adds, "At least the services they offer are not indecent or dishonorable, however unnecessary. But there are some women who hang around on the Capitoline because they believe that Jupiter is in love with them, totally undeterred by fear of Juno's anger and jealousy. Formidable enough, if you believe the poets." Seneca gives us a very different picture of Roman worship. These common people are offering to the gods their time, talents, and services, not cakes or animals, and there is no mention of carefully worded prayers. The actions the people make, washing, oiling, braiding hair, are very physical, as if these Romans wanted to experience a sense of closeness to their gods. Why would they do this? Favored slaves performed such actions for their masters. Perhaps these people wanted to cultivate a relationship with the gods so that they would have divine help in times of need. Seneca says that some of the people wanted the gods to help them in specific issues, such as lawsuits. The old actor, the pantomime, doesn't seem to have any agenda beyond seeking an audience to take pleasure in his artistic abilities. And Seneca claims that some women thought that Jupiter loved them. The Romans had many stories about Jupiter's unfaithfulness to his wife Juno, and the revenge she took on mortal women with whom he had love affairs. These people certainly believe that the gods exist, and what is more, they feel close emotional ties to their chosen deities, and want to nurture these relationships with acts of service. Seneca, an elite, well-read philosopher, dismisses these people's actions on the Capitoline as indicative of excess, superstition, lack of education. Would he have approved more of ceremonies like Augustus's sacrifices at the Saecular Games? But we have to rely on him for this information. We don't have any surviving records of what these lower-class people felt, from the women who braided Juno's hair to the old actor. It's difficult to find ancient sources that give us insight into experiences of common Romans, because most of our texts and images were created by elites. For a final source, let's turn to a different kind of object, an altar set up as a funerary monument for a little girl named Aelia Procula in 140 CE. The altar was set up by Aelia's parents. Her father was a freed slave of the emperor. Thus, while Aelia's family was wealthy enough to afford a nice monument, they didn't have the same social standing as freeborn Romans. The altar states that it is sacred to Diana and the memory of Aelia Procula. On it, we see a relief depicting Aelia with the familiar attributes of the goddess Diana: short tunic, hunting bow and quiver, a dog at her feet. This was a personal choice for Aelia's parents. Few Romans were dressed as gods on their gravestones. Why would Aelia's parents do this? The Romans didn't have a strongly defined idea of an afterlife. Most thought that you joined the shades of the dead in the underworld and didn't have much of an individualized existence. Perhaps Aelia's parents hoped that the virgin goddess Diana was a good role model for their unmarried daughter, and that as patroness of unmarried girls, she would look out for little Aelia in the afterlife. Aelia's parents chose to make this monument into an altar. Whenever they offered a sacrifice to Diana on it, they would be thinking of their daughter. Perhaps they hoped that the goddess would also be reminded of the girl at the same time. This altar would certainly support the idea that Romans could believe in their gods and seek personal relationships with them. Once again, by turning to a new type of evidence, we have a broader picture of the Roman religious experience. So with these different types of sources in mind, can we say whether the Romans believed in their gods? Did they feel emotional attachment to them in religious ceremonies? We see now that it's too simplistic to say, no, none of the Romans believed in their gods, and they never felt any kind of personal or emotional connection with them. But should our new answer be that all Romans always felt closely connected with their gods? We've noticed that the Romans had a lot of individual choice when it came to their religious practices. The Emperor Augustus's sacrifices and hymn for Apollo and Diana look very different from the everyday Romans on the Capitoline, braiding Juno's hair or performing mimes for Jupiter. The philosopher Seneca clearly disapproved of what common people were doing. Yet our research still seems incomplete, even though we have Aelia's altar, created by a freed slave. We didn't read anything written by a woman or an enslaved person. An answer of yes or no to the original question doesn't properly represent what we learned from looking at a limited selection of ancient sources. But let's stop and think about our own context. What if our problem lies with the question we asked? We have put ourselves into a bind by lumping ancient Romans together into a single category, when in fact people differed according to their class, legal status, education, and religious preferences. Our original question limits our ability to investigate our sources. We should rephrase the question to allow for the diversity of Roman experiences. For example, to what extent did Romans believe in and feel personally connected to their gods? And how did religious experiences differ among Romans? So when we approach a new subject, we should always remember to look at several sources from different perspectives, and not just stop at the first one we find. We should be aware of the limitations of our research and gaps in the evidence. Finally, we should be ready to revise our questions as our sources reveal to us new pathways of thought that we hadn't imagined at first. Such an approach shows us the richness and vibrancy of individual experiences in ancient Roman society.